Hello friends, today I'm going to talk about the genre elegy. The word elegy comes from the Greek word elegos, which was an interjection expressing grief, pity, concern, translated into English as alas. An elegy is a reflective poem of grief. It is a song of mourning. It's a melancholic lyric of lament. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, elegy is a meditative lyric poem lamenting the death of a public personage, or a friend, or a loved one. By extension, elegy is any reflective poem, any reflective lyric on the broad theme of human mortality. Bennett Bergman, in a website Lit Charts, writes that elegy reflects a poet's struggle to make the mystery of death less overwhelming by addressing it directly and contemplating its major and lasting impact on those who witness death and go on living. Earlier in the classical literature, that is in Greek literature, dating back to the 7th century BC and later in the Roman literature, we find that elegy was not confined to this kind of definition. It did not have any special relationship to the subject of grief. The classical elegies were poems or songs either of laments or they were merely love poems, especially complaints about love, written in the form of elegiac couplets. The earlier Latin elegy was not always so somber. The most famous Latin poet, Ovid, used humor and sometimes irony in a poem and still called it elegy only because it was written in elegiac couplet form, with alternating lines of dictylic hexameter and dictylic pentameter. A hexameter line contains 6 metrical feet, while a pentameter line contains 5 metrical feet. Dictylic hexameter consists of lines made from 6, that means hexa feet, each foot containing a long syllable followed by 2 short syllables. The pattern is like this: la, 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 la. In dictylic pentameter, the same pattern is repeated 5 times to create a pentameter line. So you know the difference now between hexameter and pentameter. Hexa means 6 feet in one line, in pentameter 5 feet in one line. In English literature, elegy meant any poem of serious natural poem until the 16th century. Gradually, the meaning and form of it underwent a drastic change during the 16th century. Now, it could be written in any meter or any rhyme scheme the poet chose. That means meter or rhyme scheme now did not have anything to do with elegy. Elegiac couplet was not a necessity during the 16th century and even after that. It was the theme that mattered now, not the meter. Mind it, not the meter, only the theme mattered now. It became a poem of grief and lamentation. Its tone became melancholic, sad, and reflective. After the 16th century, the term carried the definition of a poem that speaks thematically of mortal loss, of lamentation for the dead, and consolation in the last part of the poem. And this is the form of the conventional elegy that has survived even today, or I can say till today. Elegy now has become the vehicle to serve a more personal and emotional purpose for the poet. Now it has become a tool for mourning and processing of a poet's own grief. During the 18th and 19th century, that is the pre-romantic and romantic periods in English literature, the poets were very much attracted to this form of poetry because of the personal and emotional qualities. They liked it because it focused on expressing emotions or thought. According to Edward Quinn, in a dictionary of literary terms, dictionary of literary and thematic terms, the poetic, he says, what does he say? I quote it, the poetic infatuation with death achieved an even greater degree of intensity in a movement called graveyard school, whose mournful elegies achieved a vogue in the 18th century. Unquote. Poets like Thomas Gray, who belonged to this school, focused on the theme of death, of the theme of human mortality, the theme of the pain of bereavement and the feeling of loss. In this century, the English graveyard school of poets wrought generalized reflections on death and mortality, combining gloomy and sometimes ghoulish imagery of human impermanence with philosophical speculations. Thomas Gray's famous elegy, written in the country churchyard, is the best example of this genre, of this form in the 18th century. Thomas Gray expresses the sorrowful feelings which arise in his mind on seeing the graves of unknown villagers, the poor country people buried in a churchyard. Gray meditates on the fact of mortality in general in this elegy. This touching poem of personal loss has been written in a very simple language, which has bestowed dignity and solemnity to the elegy. The poem is written in iambic pentameter with lines of 10 syllables. You know, as I earlier told you, in an iambic pentameter, we have 5 feet in each line, and every foot contains 2 syllables. The first syllable is always unstressed and the second is stressed. So in iambic pentameter, there are lines of 10 syllables, alternately short and long. With the advent of Romanticism, the obsession with the theme of mortality continued. The modern poets expressed grief and sorrow in the beginning and then arrived at a consolatory conclusion about the inevitability and universality of death. They begin with mourning, There is admiration in the middle, listing qualities and impressive deeds in the person's life, and they end with implied consolation. The last part may contain a religious tone. In the modern elegy, A.R. Entwistle observes that sometimes death is merely an inspiration, a common starting point from which poets have launched speculations on death and philosophy of life, speculations on fame and destiny. The note of grief often changes towards close, turning into one of resignation and even to joy as the poet reconciles himself to the inevitability of death. In short, as Bennett Bergman puts it, the modern poets generally follow a specific thematic arc in elegies, moving from grief to an acceptance of death. So there is a thematic pattern, an arc from grief to consolation, from sorrow to the general acceptance of death. Now, I'm going to talk about various types of elegies. Basically, elegies are of many kinds, but we can divide broadly it into two classes: personal elegy and impersonal elegy. In the personal elegy, the poet laments the deaths of some very close friend or a relative or a very known person, and in the impersonal elegy, the poet grieves over human destiny and or over some aspect of contemporary life and literature. In the process of writing the elegy, the poet reveals his philosophy of life and death. We can include the poetry of the graveyard or churchyard school in this category. And as I have told you, Thomas Grave's elegy, written in the country churchyard, can be included in this impersonal type of elegy. As I already explained the poetry of this school in the earlier part of the video, now I will talk about pastoral elegy, which can also be included in the category of personal elegy. A definite form of the conventional elegy adopted from the Greek poets is the pastoral elegy, which is written in dignified and serious language. The genre is in fact a subgroup of pastoral elegy, pastoral poetry. Pastoral poetry is a genre that typically relates to rural life and generally depicts the life of shepherds. Pastoral elegy employs a set of conventions introduced by the Greek poets. The first among the conventions is the representation of a dead friend as a shepherd. Usually the lamentation is performed by another fellow shepherd in a pastoral or natural or rustic environment. The mourners, most of them are very close friends of that shepherd. That means most of the mourners are shepherds. The death of a shepherd is mourned by the natural world in a pastoral setting. Pastoral elegies usually include many mythological figures such as nymphs who are believed to have guarded the departed shepherd. This form of poetry has several key features, including the invocation of the muse, expression of the poet's grief in the guise of a shepherd, or a praise of the deceased, a tirade against death, a detailing of the effects of the specific death upon nature, and eventually the poet's stimulus acceptance of death's inevitability and hope of mortality. The two important English elegies that follow are, first we have Milton's Lycidas, of course. He uses pastoral convention, but the others are, we have Shelley's Adonis, which was published in 1821 and it was written on the occasion of Keats' death. And the other one is Matthew Arnold's Thyrsis, which was written in 1867. And with this, I conclude this part of the video. I think you have enjoyed the lesson, and I hope you feel that you have gained some information through this video.